Do constructive talks mean actual progress for the U.S. and Iran? A round of meetings in Muscat over Iran's nuclear program marked a first since 2018. Both sides called them positive, with more to come this weekend. So will the talks maintain their diplomatic tone? And could the U.S., Iran, and Israel really get what they want? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Iran's nuclear program. Indirect negotiations through a friendly mediator proved positive over the weekend. But while both the U.S. and Iran expressed some optimism, Iran's negotiators stressed the talks were peaceful and respectful because no inappropriate language was used. So will that traditional diplomatic tone remain the case if U.S. leadership is known for brash and sometimes bullying behavior? We also have to remember the plan for talks was announced upon the Israeli Prime Minister's visit to Washington. And Israel wants Iran to give up all its weapons. So can a balance be found? Here's a look now at the talks and where these relaunch negotiations could go.
For 2 intense hours, Oman's capital Muscat was the scene of a rare, albeit indirect, meeting between the US and Iran. The representatives of 2 sworn enemies, US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, sent to negotiate over Tehran's nuclear future, with Omani officials acting as go-betweens. Both sides remain tight-lipped about the specifics, but subtle notes of cautious optimism are coming from both sides as well. Donald Trump had this to say afterwards.
I think they're going okay.
What was your, what did Mr. Witkoff tell you about?
Because it doesn't, nothing matters until you get it done.
As a first session, it was a constructive meeting. It took place in a calm and very respectful environment.
During the talks, Omani officials acted as intermediaries, though the Iranian delegation said there was a brief chance encounter with US delegates at the end. The aim for the US is for Iran to halt its nuclear program and dispose of its highly enriched uranium. Iran is looking for sanctions relief and to be allowed back into the global banking system. Under Obama, various world powers announced a long-term nuclear agreement. Tehran would limit uranium enrichment in return for sanctions being lifted. But Trump pulled the US out from the agreement unilaterally in 2018 during his first term, calling it the worst deal ever and insisting he'd get a better one. That didn't happen, and Iran backed away from the accord. Relations deteriorated and animosity between the 2 nations increased. Efforts at indirect negotiations by the Biden administration went nowhere. Iran began enriching uranium up to 60%, according to reports by the International Atomic Energy Agency. It's the highest purity Iran has ever managed, and only one technical step below the 90% needed for weapons-grade uranium. Tehran insists it only uses nuclear enrichment for civilian energy purposes. Trump's second term has made halting the potential for weapons development a concrete goal.
I want them to be a rich, great nation. The only thing is, one thing, simple, it's really simple, they can't have a nuclear weapon. And they gotta go fast, because they're fairly close to having one. And they're not gonna have one. And if we have to do something very harsh, we'll do it.
In March, Iran threatened to target forces on a joint UK-US military base in the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean if the US launches any strikes on Iran. Satellite photographs revealed that several US B-2 Spirit bombers arrived at that outpost not long after that threat. Tehran is in a much weaker position now than it was during the Biden presidency. Sanctions have decimated its economy. It's lost a number of proxy allies in the Middle East, and Israeli airstrikes have knocked out vital air defences. A second round of talks has been scheduled for the coming weekend. Nuclear talks with Iran have failed before. But if they fail this time, there is a very real threat of a joint US-Israeli military offensive.
So how hopeful should we be? And what could be the consequences of failure? Well, joining me now to debate that are from Washington, non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and former Deputy Assistant Secretary at U.S. Homeland Security, Thomas Warwick. From Tehran, Associate Professor at Tehran University's Faculty of World Studies, Fouad Izadi. And from Indianapolis, Associate Professor of International Studies at the Hamilton Lugar School, Hussein Banai. Thank you all so much for being with me. Thomas, I'll start with you. A lot was made of the success of this first meeting. Do you think anyone should be celebrating right now, especially since they were indirect talks with, I guess, one face-to-face encounter? Let's put it that way.
I've been involved in talks between Americans and Iranians for 35 years now, and I do have to say that the goal of the first meeting was to get to a second meeting, and that's now on the schedule. So yes, that makes the first meeting a success. Everything else is atmospherics, but at least the talks have started and they are continuing, and that's going to allow us to get down to some very important, very difficult issues.
Okay, Hussein, I can see you agree, nodding your head. Fouad, what about you?
I agree. I think the first meeting did what the first meeting was supposed to do. And, I remember when we were talking about JCPOA, the first anniversary, everybody was happy. Some people were saying the first anniversary is not important. The second anniversary is important. I think we can repeat that terminology for these round of negotiations as well.
But Fouad, Iran's negotiator said, this stood out to me, that he said it was peaceful and respectful because no inappropriate language was used. So what happens if that language changes, which is somewhat common with President Trump's administration? Will Iran respond badly to being spoken to in a less diplomatic manner? Let's put it that way.
Iranian diplomats are quite capable of managing unruly counterparts or managing the people on the other side of the table the way they're supposed to be managed. I think there are bigger goals than attitudes. But if Iranians realize that this is a waste of time, they're busy with other stuff. They're not going to waste their time, especially with someone like Trump that has the track record that we all know what that track record is.
So Hussein, as I said, I saw you nodding your head in agreement. So you feel good that at least it was a success to get to the next step, or do you think it's symbolic of being on the right path forward and this could turn out well?
I think it was. I think it was a bit of an ice-breaking exercise more than anything else. The goal was to get to the second meeting, which I think both parties felt good about, having broken that ice, being on that path toward that second meeting. But I think more than anything else, I think both sides can now get beyond the struggle of signaling from their respective capitals and actually being in the same geography, in this case in Oman, and getting used to kind of communicating with each other through intermediaries first, and then face to face. So I think both sides have gotten what they wanted to get out of this first meeting. Okay, and you think that Muscat, Oman was a pretty ideal meeting place with Omani negotiators here. There was talk about it taking place in Rome for the next step with Giorgia Meloni as the host, but now it seems it's going back to Muscat. Is that a good move? I think so. I mean, this is a place that has been a home for a lot of back-channel communications between the United States and Iran, going back to the period before the nuclear deal in 2015, around 2013 or so. I think the Iranian government trusts the Omanis as the intermediaries here. And the United States also very importantly sees the Omanis as the right arbitrators And they both can trust that when they pass messages through Omani foreign ministers or national security advisor, that is going to get communicated exactly in the spirit that each side had meant it to. So I think it is an ideal place. Whether it'll move to other locations, I think as we saw with JCPOA, that involved other parties to the negotiation. But in this case, it's really just the United States and Iran. The so-called P5+1 is not part of the picture, at least not yet.
So, Thomas, are you on the same page there? And also, if you could move on to why you think President Trump really wants this right now. He wants this to happen on his watch.
Well, but let's be clear what President Trump wants. What he wants is an end to Iran's nuclear program. And the question is going to be, what will Iran ask for and get in return for that? Everyone expects that some kind of sanctions relief is going to be in the cards. There may be the possibility of the United States selling export goods to Iran. The reality is, if you want American-made washers and dryers and iPhones, you can get them for a price, but there's clearly a lot to be done. The problem is beyond that. Iran is going to need to accept that there will be a change in the regional security arrangements. Certainly, it has had laid bare its military vulnerability after 2 Israeli strikes showed that foreign powers could attack anywhere in the Islamic Republic they want without Iran being able to stop it. So the military dynamic is now very different from what it was in 2016.
So, Fawad, is that effectively why Iran is negotiating now?
I think Iran does want to see the illegal sanctions against the country removed. It is okay for the U.S. Congress to pass laws and limit American companies from engaging with Iran, but it is not okay. It's against international law. So I think Iran wants to have sanctions relief. It's against international law to threaten other countries. The UN Charter, the 2nd chapter, you're not supposed to use force. It says threat or use of force. So every day that Trump threatens to attack Iran or bomb Iran, he's violating international law. Iran is fully capable of defending the country. The Iranian forces can do that, but war is not in the interest of Iran. War is not in the interest of the United States or regional countries. So these are the issues that Iran is concerned about. The U.S. side can continue with the failed policies of the past, or they can change course. We had the U.S. intelligence community publishing a report a few weeks ago saying that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon program, and Iranian leaders have not decided to have a nuclear weapon program. So I think if President Trump reads his own intelligence community's reports carefully, he may decide to change course.
Okay. Well, let me ask Hossein then. You know, President Trump says, I'm quoting him basically, he says it's simple. And the only thing Iran can't have is a nuclear weapon. So is it really the only thing? Because Israel says they want a Libya-style deal whereby Iran has to forfeit basically all its weapons in order to get sanction relief. But how much is President Trump at this point really beholden to what Israel thinks is in its national security interest, re-Iran?
It's hard to gauge what President Trump actually wants out of this second round of talks. I mean, under the last set of negotiations under JCPOA, Iran was bound by a fairly strict set of rules, verifiable by the international community, that it would not get to a weapons-grade level of enrichment, and that President Trump pulled the United States out of that deal and, in fact, forced the hand of Tehran to once again increase enrichment levels. I have always believed that Trump's objection to the deal came out of a personal antipathy toward President Obama and the fact that he thinks Iran actually walked away with far more material benefits in the form of sanctions relief. I think Trump has demonstrated that his transactional style really focuses on net material benefits to a country. In this case, the amount of money that Iran got, Iranian oil, which is something that he's really fixated about. So it'll be interesting to see if he introduces those elements, which obviously for very important reasons were part of the last set of negotiations. It's hard for me to see how much more of an improved deal he might want to get beyond the JCPOA when it comes to those material benefits. But we'll just have to wait and see. It'll have to come out through the course of negotiations.
And you know, Tom, it might sound petty in this discussion right now, but I heard a number of analysts say that in large part because of President Trump's ego, he somehow is gunning for a Nobel Prize. And negotiating a deal with the Iran nuclear program could possibly get him there. So could this be another motivation for the U.S., for Trump in particular, going forward here, that they just want a deal that might give him this kind of diplomatic coup and a new kind of credibility on the international stage?
Well, certainly President Trump thinks he has all the credibility he needs, but he would not be the first world leader to want to win a Nobel Prize for his accomplishments. I think the real question, though, is going to be that there's going to be give and take on both sides, and both sides are going to have to focus on what is most important to them. I think the Trump administration has done a good job of signaling what its objectives are. And unlike other areas like tariffs, where no one is really quite sure what's going on or what the goal is, in this case, President Trump could not be more clear than he has been. I think the challenge is going to be on the Iranian side. Will there be the same clarity of what Iran is willing to ask for and agree to in order for both sides to get what they want out of this negotiation? There's clearly going to have to be give and take, and we haven't yet seen how much flexibility there is going to be either on non-nuclear issues like sanctions from the American side or from the Iranian side on virtually everything.
Okay, Fawad, can you comment on that? Do you know a little bit more about how much Iran will be willing to give?
On your first issue, I think if President Trump wants to have a Nobel Peace Prize, he needs to stop U.S. aid for the genocide in Gaza. I doubt it if anybody would give him a Nobel Peace Prize while he's engaging in a genocide. On your second issue, I think what Iran wants is something similar to JCPOA. Iran is the most inspected country by IAEA. Iran has accepted limitations on its enrichment level. Steve Witkoff, the representative of the United States, had an interview with Fox News a few hours ago saying that it seems that he accepts the fact that Iran can have low enrichment. I think if they continue with that thought, you are going to have an agreement if the other issues are not raised. So Iran has no problem with inspections. Iran has no problem with limitation on its enrichment and other limitations that JCPOA had. So if the United States was worried about a nuclear bomb being built by Iran, having those limitations will assure that Iran's program is going to continue to be peaceful. But if they want to use the nuclear issue as a tool to sanction Iran or use the type of rhetoric they have used, then I don't think you are going to see an agreement.
Okay. Hossein, if I can with you, though, speaking of other kind of spanners in the works that could be thrown in here, and I'm going to go back to Israel again, because it looks like Israel and the U.S. might not be on the same page here. So how much do you think the U.S. really cares or has to care about what Israel wants here? Could Trump eventually tell Netanyahu, look, I want this done. You're going to have to accept what I give you graciously. And in which case, could Israel respond poorly or well to that?
Yeah, I think that's actually the most important relationship to watch here. In terms of what it would take Iran to agree, we already know based on the negotiations between 2013 and 2015 what the outlines of what Iranian leaders are willing to agree to. What we have here is a stated objective from the President of the United States that is actually in tension with the stated objective of the Prime Minister of Israel. In that Israel would like to see Iran's nuclear program significantly set back, probably shut down to levels that would go beyond what Tehran would agree to. And Donald Trump, who wants to get a deal as quickly as possible, one that preferably would have maybe an extra safeguard or two beyond JCPOA, but nothing too stringent. I think we're about to learn what the negotiation between Netanyahu and Trump will look like, where the Israelis are willing to settle in terms of their red lines, knowing that whatever agreement comes out of this particular administration is likely to be the one that's going to stay for far longer than the one that would be agreed upon under a Democratic administration.
Tom, would you agree there? And ultimately, let me ask you this also. If you think, Trump's maximum pressure sanctions actually did work. Many felt that they would somehow backfire, but now it's being argued that they are giving him leverage now, and he can use also that, ultimate leverage over Israel to bring Netanyahu down from his hardcore standpoint that Iran has to sacrifice everything.
Well, I remember telling my colleagues during the first Trump administration that the biggest challenge that maximum pressure sanctions had was that the Iranians were quite prepared to wait out President Trump. Now they're looking at 4 years of President Trump and his approach to international negotiations. They're looking over his shoulder at a united Congress that has deep concerns about Iran's nuclear ambitions and its destabilizing role in the region. And I think that they're seeing that they really have to have some kind of a deal. The Iranian economy is not doing well. There is unrest and disagreement over internal social policies at home. And so the question for Iran's leaders is, do you want to take the deal that President Trump is offering, or do you want to have Iran continue to go on what is economically at least a downward path? I think that there's an obvious way that each side can get what it wants out of this, but I think that's going to start with exactly what President Trump said, which is Iran is going to have to give up its nuclear program.
Fawad, go ahead and comment on that. I mean, do Iranians see it as that they would have to spiral down an economic path, or is that not what's important here?
What President Trump says and repeats almost every day is that he doesn't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And what Iran has been saying for many years is that Iran does not want to have a nuclear weapon. There's actually a fatwa by the country's leader against building one. So on the surface, we can have an agreement on Saturday because both sides are saying the same thing. It should not be that difficult. But in reality, when you get to the details, you realize that the other side, at least in the past, is bringing up other issues. For example, Iran's regional policy or Iran's ballistic missile program. And some American politicians have talked about using the Libya model, and Netanyahu also has said the same thing. If they want to make Iran to follow the Libya model, that's not going to happen because we know what happened to Libya. So it depends on whether we believe Trump or whether we believe other people. Trump has a chance to have America first. And if he thinks about the US interest, he would have an agreement with Iran in the near future. Okay. But unfortunately, in the past, we have seen some American politicians who think that they should worry about Israel's foreign policy. Some of them are Israel firsters. They think about Israel's interest. Sometimes it seems more than the American interest. If they take over Trump's Iran policy, I think you're going to see a big failure.
Fawad.
And Andrea, if I may jump in here, I would agree with Dr. Fawad that Libya is not the best example, but South Africa clearly is. The South African leadership decided, after conducting a nuclear test even, that the country was actually safer without nuclear weapons than with them, and history has proved that judgment to be correct. I think what the world is hoping is that Iran's leaders follow in the path of South Africa and realize that a nuclear program actually puts the country's security at greater risk. And so if we can have Iran playing a role in the region that moves everyone towards peace and security, then Iran will be better off. The United States, Turkey, every other country in the region will be better off if Iran chooses that path.
Okay. Well, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank sincerely all three of you so much for being with me, and our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.